Welcome to True Crime Bites, Death Row and Executions, where we honor lives lost and revisit the final chapters of those who crossed the line. I'm really glad you're here. On July 15th, 2025, Michael Bernard Bell is scheduled to be executed by lethal injection in the state of Florida. After nearly 3 decades on death row, his time is finally running out. But as the clock ticks toward his final hour, disturbing questions still linger about who he really was, why he killed, and whether justice is truly being served. This is the full story behind the man who unleashed terror with an AK-47, leaving innocent people dead in the name of revenge. If you're drawn to stories that dig into the darkest corners of true crime, stories that leave you questioning everything, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. This one's not just about the crimes, it's about the consequences. On a humid Florida night in December of 1993, Michael Bernard Bell stepped into the shadows of revenge, armed, bitter, and burning with grief. Months earlier, his brother Lamar had been shot and killed by a man named Theodore Wright. It was ruled a justifiable homicide. Self-defense, they said, but to Bell it was murder, and justice had been denied. Friends and family would later recall how he swore vengeance, declaring he would make Wright pay. That vow would become a blood-soaked promise. On December 8th, just one day before the carnage, Bell secured an AK-47 assault rifle through an acquaintance. The purchase wasn't random, it was preparation. The very next evening, December 9th, Bell saw what he thought was Wright's yellow Plymouth parked outside a liquor lounge in Jacksonville. He left, collected 2 of his friends, grabbed the rifle, and returned to the scene. What he didn't know was that Wright no longer owned the car. It had been sold to Wright's half-brother, Jimmy West. As the hours slipped by, Bell waited. Eventually, West came out of the club, accompanied by 2 women, Tamecka Smith and another female. They approached the Plymouth, laughing, unaware of the danger lurking in the dark. Just as they were getting into the car, Bell emerged, walked straight to the driver's side, opened the door, and opened fire. Jimmy West was hit 12 times and died instantly. Tamecka Smith, struck by 4 bullets, was rushed to the hospital but succumbed to her injuries. The third woman somehow managed to duck and survived. Jimmy West didn't know Michael Bell. He didn't pull a trigger or take anyone's brother. His only connection to this tragedy was a car, one he had bought from his half-brother Theodore Wright. That small decision unknowingly placed him in the crosshairs of someone else's rage. Tamecka Smith was just 18 years old, a young woman with her whole life still waiting to begin. That night, she wasn't part of any conflict. She wasn't a target. She was getting into a car with friends, and she never made it home. It's chilling to think how a simple decision, like getting into a friend's car or stepping out of a club, can be the moment everything ends. Jimmy West and Tamecka Smith didn't even know Michael Bell, but his grief, his rage, his warped sense of justice swallowed them whole. Wrong place, wrong time. That's all it took. But Bell wasn't done. Before fleeing the scene, he turned his rifle toward the crowd outside the lounge and fired, sending bullets spraying into the night. He even aimed at a nearby house where children were playing inside. Then he vanished, disappearing into the shadows, eventually arriving at his aunt's home. Witnesses said he was calm, cold. He told someone, "Theodore got my brother, and now I got his brother." That massacre wasn't Bell's first act of violence. Years earlier, in 1989, he murdered LaShawn Coward and her 2-year-old son, Travis. Unfortunately, no pictures are publicly available of LaShawn and her son. The 3 had been in a car when Bell stopped them, got out, and began shooting. There's something especially gut-wrenching about the murder of a child. LaShawn Coward and her 2-year-old son, Travis, never stood a chance. That's not just a crime. It's the destruction of a future. a little boy who never even got to live. Afterwards, a second vehicle pulled up and picked him up, taking him away as the mother and child lay dying. In August of 1993, just 4 months before the liquor lounge shootings, Bell murdered Michael Johnson, the boyfriend of Bell's own mother, following a domestic dispute. Bell went to Johnson's home and shot him on the front porch. What happened to Michael Bell's brother clearly broke something in him, but trauma doesn't excuse what followed. It explains it, maybe, but it doesn't justify it. A tragedy turned him into the author of his own horror story. The crimes painted a picture of a man spiraling into darkness, propelled by rage and grief, striking out with deadly intent at anyone he deemed an enemy. His past was catching up to him, and this time, the system moved swiftly. On September 15, 1994, Bell was arrested. 2 weeks later, a grand jury indicted him on 2 counts of first-degree murder for the deaths of Jimmy West and Tamecka Smith. The case went to trial the following year. On March 9, 1995, the jury found him guilty. 8 days later, the same jury unanimously recommended the death penalty for both murders. The court agreed. On June 2, 1995, Bell was sentenced to die for each life he had taken that night outside the lounge. The court pointed to several aggravating factors. Bell had a long history of violent felonies. He posed a great risk to others, firing indiscriminately into a crowd and into homes. But the most damning factor was cold, calculated premeditation. Bell didn't act in the heat of the moment. He bought the weapon, tracked the car, waited, and executed his victims at close range. It was, the court found, methodical and merciless. Bell fought the verdict. He argued that his lawyer was ineffective and that the court had wrongly refused his request to represent himself. He claimed the cold, calculated, and premeditated aggravator was misapplied. He pointed to the trauma of his brother's death as a mitigating factor, insisting that he was emotionally disturbed at the time. But the Florida Supreme Court was unmoved. On July 17, 1997, it affirmed both his conviction and the death sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to hear his case in 1998. Still, Bell didn't give up. He filed post-conviction motions, attempting to find cracks in the process. He claimed new evidence, ineffective counsel, mishandling of mitigating factors. In 2001, the case was briefly remanded so he could amend his claims. But the court again found no merit. All appeals failed. For the families of Jimmy and Tamecka, the waiting has lasted more than 30 years. And no matter how the legal battles end, it's a chapter that never really closes. Their loved ones are still gone. There's no appeal for that kind of pain. Even when someone's done the unthinkable, there's still something heavy about a state execution. It's a reminder that no one really walks away clean. Bell made sure 2 people never got a second chance. And now neither will he. In the final weeks, a new appeal surfaced. Bell's attorneys claimed that 2 key witnesses from the original trial had recanted their statements. They said their testimonies had been coerced or given under pressure. A hearing was held in June, just weeks before the execution date. But in a dramatic twist, both witnesses refused to testify. They invoked the Fifth Amendment, refusing to speak out of fear of being charged with perjury. Without their cooperation, the claims of recantation fell apart. The court denied the appeal, ruling there was no substantial new evidence to justify a new trial or resentencing. As it stood, the executions would proceed. For Michael Bernard Bell, decades of defiance, appeals, and courtroom battles had led back to where it began. To the blood-soaked night in December 1993 when 2 innocent lives were ended in a hail of bullets meant for someone else. Jimmy West and Tamecka Smith didn't know Michael Bell. They didn't know his brother. They were simply in the wrong place, at the wrong time, inside the wrong car. And for that, they paid the ultimate price. We often discuss justice in cases like this. But closure, That's a different story. Some wounds stay open, no matter how many court dates pass or how many appeals are denied. Justice may be delivered, but healing, that's personal. As the clock runs down, Bell now waits for the state to carry out the sentence handed down nearly 30 years ago. The system has ruled, the victims' families have waited, and justice, slow and final, inches forward. The headlines always focus on the killer. But what about Jimmy West, Tamecka Smith, LaShawn, and little Travis? They're more than victims. They were people, loved, needed, and missed, and they should be remembered. Thank you for watching and staying with me through this story. Cases like Michael Bell's remind us how far the consequences of violence can reach, how grief, revenge, and tragedy can ripple through families, communities, and generations. If this story moved you or made you think twice about the weight of justice and the finality of execution, please consider subscribing to the channel, liking the video, and sharing your thoughts in the comments. There are more stories to tell, and your support helps keep them alive. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.